and welcome to our new topic today, which is pragmatics. Pragmatics was first coined in 1930 by an American philosopher named Charles Morris, and in the 70s, pragmatics was developed as a branch of linguistics. Some of the most known philosophers in the field of pragmatics are Charles Morris, John Austin, John Searle, Grice, Serpent and Wilson, Jeffrey Leach, Stephen Levinson, and George Joule, and others. Pragmatics has many related definitions. It is defined as the study of meaning in context, or as the study of utterance meaning, or as the study of speaker meaning, or as the study of meaning beyond the sentence level, or as the study of language in use, or the study of invisible meaning, i.e. meaning that is not said. How is pragmatics different from semantics? Pragmatics and semantics are similar in that they both study meaning. However, there are main differences between both sciences. Semantics studies word, phrase, and sentence meaning, whereas pragmatics studies utterance meaning. Semantics is context independent, has nothing to do with context, whereas pragmatics is context dependent. You can never arrive at an interpretation for an utterance without studying the context. Therefore, we say that semantics is decontextualized, whereas pragmatics is contextualized. Semantics studies the meaning on sentence level. However, whereas pragmatics studies meaning beyond the sentence level. Semantics focuses on the literal meaning, whereas pragmatics focuses on the speaker meaning or the intended meaning of the speaker. Semantics focuses on meaning in abstraction, whereas pragmatics focuses on meaning in use. Now, it is important to remember that there is an overlap between semantics and pragmatics. Now, we're going to study some examples to understand the difference between semantics and pragmatics. Example number 1. Now, for example, if someone says, "It's hot in here," the semantic meaning or the sentence meaning for this sentence is that the temperature in the place where the speaker is at is above average. And this is the only interpretation, the only semantic interpretation for this sentence. This is the literal meaning of the sentence. Whereas when this sentence is uttered by a speaker in different contexts, it may have different meanings, different intended meaning. For example, the speaker may mean "Open the window, please," or "Turn on the AC," or "Let's change the room," or maybe some other meanings. Now, the speaker meaning depends on the speaker's intention, what the speaker intends by saying an utterance. Also, the same utterance, remember that the same utterance can be uttered in different contexts by the same speaker or by different speakers to mean different things. Another example that explains the difference between semantics and pragmatics is, for example, when a speaker says, "I am sick." Semantically, this sentence means that the speaker is stating that he does not feel well. And this is the only semantic interpretation. This is the literal meaning of the sentence. So sentence meaning or semantic meaning depends on the literal meaning of the words in the sentence. Whereas if it is uttered by a speaker in a context or in different contexts, it may mean different things, such as I need to go home, For example, if a student says to a teacher, "I am sick," he may mean that he needs to go home. Or if it is uttered by a daughter to a mother who has just asked her to wash the dishes, it may mean that I cannot wash the dishes. Or maybe it can mean take me to the doctor if this utterance is said by a friend to a friend. Or I cannot come to the party if uttered by a person invited by another person to a party. What is the importance of pragmatics? Pragmatics provides us with a full and deep account of human language behavior, how humans use language. That's why they define pragmatics as language in use. Also, pragmatics explain the use of every aspect of language, whether phonetics, syntax, vocabulary, spelling, etc. So, for example, that's why we use a specific structure, spelling, or sound rather than another. For example, why do we say Khadija, or why do we say Khadouj, or why do we say Ali, or why do we say Mrs. Khadija or Mrs. Zu'bi in different contexts? Also, why do we use a passive structure instead of an active structure? Or why do we say Albi instead of Galbi, or instead of Kalbi, and so on? Pragmatics explains all this kind of variation. One of the main definitions of pragmatics is that pragmatics is the study of meaning in context. Therefore, context is vital to the study of pragmatics. Pragmatics is context dependent. You cannot understand pragmatics if you don't understand the context. What is context? Generally speaking, context is the environment in which the utterances or the utterance takes place, or it is the situation of the utterance, or it may be defined as the discourse that surrounds the utterance and helps to determine its interpretation, or as it is defined by Wedison in 2000, the aspects of the circumstances or the aspects of the circumstance of actual language use which are taken as relevant to meaning. Context is classified into the following types. Number one, linguistic context, or sometimes it's called co-text. Number two, physical context. Number three, social context. And number four, epistemic context. Let's start with the linguistic context first. The linguistic context refers to the words and sentences surrounding any part of a discourse that helps to determine its meaning, and sometimes it is called co-text. Or it is the group of words that accompany a certain word or phrase in a sentence. It also refers to the relationship between words, phrases, sentences, and even paragraphs. It is the set of all other words used in an utterance or sentence. For example, the word mole, which is a homonym, which has two meanings, either a skin mark or a small animal, will not be understood unless it is used in a linguistic context. So, if we have the word mole in a sentence such as she has a nice mole on her left cheek, now this linguistic context, which is marked in red, will help us determine the meaning of the word mole, and one will understand it as the skin mark. Then, all words surrounding the word mole, again, which are marked in red, is called or are called the linguistic context. The physical context refers to objects surrounding the communication at the time of the utterance, such as tables, cars, chairs, signs, walls, windows, curtains, etc. It also refers to place and time of utterance, when and where the communication is taking place. And also, it refers to the actions which are taking place around the speakers or around the communication. In order to understand the idea of physical context, we will explain the following two examples. Suppose that you are driving your car and you see a sign that reads, "Slow down, children crossing the road." Of course, you will know that you're driving in front of a school and that you have to drive slowly in order not to run any student over, because signs such this are always posted in front of schools, typically. Example 2, when a teacher says to a student, "Come to my office at 12 p.m. tomorrow," the physical context will indicate the time and the place reference of this utterance. It indicates that at the time of the utterance, the student is not in the teacher's office and the time is before tomorrow. The social context is a very important type of context. It refers to the relationship between the participants in the communication. Examples: student-teacher relationship, father-son relationship, the relationship between an employer and employee, the relationship between husband and wife, the relationship between a police officer and a driver, relationship between a student and a student, the relationship between a waiter and a customer, the relationship between doctor and patient, and so on and so forth. The social context helps a lot in determining the interpretation of a certain utterance. The following are examples on the relationship between the participants in a conversation. Now, which is appropriate to be said and which is inappropriate to be said. For example, student to teacher, "Give me the book and go home." This would be inappropriate because the student does not have the power to ask the teacher to give him the book and go home. A son to a father, "Hurry up and bring me some water." This would also be inappropriate because a son does not have the power or the status to ask his father to do so. However, if the father tells his son to hurry up and bring him some water, this would be appropriate. Friend to a friend, "What the hell are you talking about?" This is appropriate. But a student to a teacher or a son to a father, it would be inappropriate. A husband to wife, "Honey, could you make me a cup of tea?" This is appropriate. But a student to a teacher, "Honey, could you make me a cup of tea?" This is inappropriate. Employee to employer, "I hereby fire you from the company." This is inappropriate, but it would be appropriate if the employer says to the employee, "I hereby fire you from the company," because he has the power to do so. The epistemic context refers to the background knowledge and beliefs of the participants in the communication, and it plays a huge role in pragmatics because pragmatics is the study of invisible meaning. Therefore, we have to employ our background knowledge and beliefs and intuition to come to an interpretation of a certain utterance. For example, If A says to B, have you seen Jack? And B answers, the red car is across the street. Looking at these two sentences or utterances, one will notice that they are incoherent, that the conversation seems incoherent. There is no relationship between the first utterance and the second utterance. However, if we know that the speaker A and the listener B both know that Jack has a red car, then the conversation would seem coherent and can be easily understood. Therefore, it is on the part of the listener to fill in this missing information and come to the interpretation of that utterance. Example 2 also explains the epistemic context. A says to B, have you bought that Toyota you told me about? To which B answers, my wife traveled with the kids to Turkey for a month. These two utterances seem unrelated. However, when A uses his background knowledge of the world as well as his intuition, he will be able to understand that B did not buy the car because his wife, i.e. B's wife, spent the money when she traveled to Turkey with the kids for a month. Then there is a missing information that A, based on his knowledge of the world, was able to fill in. Why is context important? Understanding context or the contextual information surrounding an utterance is pivotal to its interpretation. That is, if you need to fully understand an utterance, you have to know the context in which it was used. Therefore, context fills in details and allows full understanding or interpretation of a piece of communication or a piece of conversation or an utterance. Some words, such as DEIXIS, cannot be interpreted without a context. For example, words like there, here, tomorrow, now, that, and those. For example, if someone says to you, take this from here to there, you will not be able to understand the meaning of this, here, and there unless you have the context. This example needs more than a linguistic context to arrive at its interpretation. You will not be able to determine the interpretation of the deictic words this, here, and there unless you have a physical context. Well, pragmatics is the study of invisible meaning, the study of implicit meaning, the study of meaning that is not said. For example, let's consider the following example. Suppose that you're driving your car and you come across a sign found on a building that says heated, attendant, and parking. Based on the meaning of each word in the sign, which is the literal meaning, and the meaning of the whole sign, and the place where the sign was found, the physical context, and the knowledge of the world, the epistemic context, one will be able to understand that, number one, it is not logical to think that the sign is advertising a place where you can park an attendant and heat him up. Number two, this is a place where you can park your car, although the word car is not mentioned in the sign. Number three, this is a parking garage, and this parking garage is heated. And number four, that there is an attendant, a parking attendant, who will take care of your car. One of the important topics in pragmatics is DEIXIS. And DEIXIS is a Greek word meaning pointing via language. We point to things, to time, to places by using language. It is also known as deictic expressions. Deictic expressions are words or phrases that are used to point to people, time, place, situations in which the speaker is speaking. Now, it is very difficult and sometimes impossible to arrive at the interpretation of deictic words without knowing the context, especially the physical one. For example, if someone says, "You will have to bring it back tomorrow because she is not here today." Now, the deictic words, the underlined words in this utterance are all deictic words, and these underlined words would be very difficult to interpret or to understand out of context. We must have context in order to understand their meanings. Types of DEIXIS. There are 4 types of DEIXIS or deictic expressions: person DEIXIS, spatial DEIXIS, temporal DEIXIS, and general word DEIXIS. With regard to person DEIXIS, these deictic expressions point to things. For example, it, this, that, these boxes, and also point to people like you, him, he, them, her, and that man, this man, those men, these men. Spatial DEIXIS, they point, or spatial deictic words, they point to a place or location. Example, here, there, this place, near that, away from here. Temporal DEIXIS is the 3rd type. They point to time. For example, now, then, tomorrow, today, last night, yesterday, after 2 hours. General DEIXIS, they have deictic content in them. For example, bring, take, go, come, far, close, send, move, fetch. These words, you can understand their meanings by their relationship to the speaker. Now, if someone says bring something here, that means you bring it from a place far from the speaker to a place close to the speaker. If you say go, you go to a place from you go to a place that is close to the speaker, to a place that is far from the speaker. DEIXIS or deictic words are interpreted in terms of what person, thing, or time the speaker has in mind. Deictic words are interpreted in terms of what is close to the speaker and what is not. For example, if someone says, move this from here to there, it means move an object from a point that is close to the speaker to a point that is far from the speaker. Now, and if someone says, take this dish to the kitchen, now the deictic expressions here entails that the speaker is not in the kitchen and he wants the listener to take that dish to the kitchen. DEIXIS can also be expressed by tense. Tense can be used as a deictic term to point to past time, present time, and future time. For example, when you say, I lived in New York for 3 years, this points, the tense in this sentence points to past time. Now, I live in New York. Now, the tense of the verb in this sentence points to present time. And I will live in New York for 3 years. The tense of the verb in this sentence indicate or point to future time. Deictic expressions are only meaningful in a given context, which has to be shared by the speaker and the listener. Deictic expressions are learned by children at a very early stage. Deictic expressions are more useful and easier to interpret in face-to-face communication because of the presence of nonverbal language like body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, and etc. Deictic expressions can be used by some people to have some fun. For example, store owner who puts a sign that reads "free ice cream tomorrow" in order to make you come back to the store. He can always claim that you are one day too early for the ice cream because it's not tomorrow yet. An important notion that is related to pragmatics is reference, and we discussed this notion earlier in the course. Reference is an act by which a speaker or writer uses language to enable a listener or reader to identify something in the world. And we can also say that reference is the relationship between elements of language and elements of the world, elements that are part of language, linguistic expressions, and elements that are part of the world, they are outside the language. And reference is an act by which linguistic forms are used to refer, identify something. Types of reference. We have three types of reference: exophoric reference, anaphoric reference, and cataphoric reference. Exophoric reference occurs when a word or phrase refers to something outside the discourse. For example, when someone says they are late again, can you believe it? Now they here refers to a person outside the discourse. He's not mentioned yet. Number two, anaphoric reference occurs when a word, phrase refers to something mentioned earlier in the discourse. Now, this kind of reference goes backward. For example, when we say Michael went to the bank, he was annoyed because it was closed. Here, the pronouns he and it, they have anaphoric reference. They have anaphoric reference. He refers backward to Michael, and it refers backward to bank. Michael here is called antecedent, and bank also here is called antecedent. He refers back to the antecedent Michael. It refers back to the antecedent bank. Number three, cataphoric reference occurs when a word or phrase refers to something mentioned later in the discourse, i.e., referring forward. For example, although I phone her every week, my mother's still happy. Notice that we mentioned the pronoun first, then we mentioned the referent, which is mother, later on. So here refers to mother that comes in the next clause. Inference is another important notion in pragmatics. It means additional information used by the listener to create a connection between what is said and what must be meant. The speaker says something and the listener has to infer it. Now, for example, A says to B, "Can I take a look at your Chomsky?" To which B answers, "Sure, it's on the table over there." In this example, the listener B infers that the speaker A is asking for a book written by Chomsky rather than Chomsky himself. A uses a proper name to refer to a thing, and B does not rely on the literal meaning of the utterance, but on his background knowledge to interpret the utterance. Also, in the example, "I love to listen to Mozart," in this example, the listener will infer that the speaker means that he loves to listen to Mozart's music, not to Mozart himself, because Mozart is no longer alive. give more examples on inferences. A, I saw Shakespeare in London. B, did you enjoy it? In this example, the listener B infers that the speaker A, who says I saw Shakespeare in London, is talking about a play by Shakespeare, but not Shakespeare himself. Now, example 4, A says to B, have you seen Cabbage Head? To which B answers, he's just left. B in this example infers that A is not looking for an actual cabbage head. Instead, the phrase cabbage head was used to refer to a person that is known to both the speaker and the listener. But for a person who is known, then the listener knows that A is not referring to an actual cabbage head, but to a person who is known for both A and B. Here, a name of a thing is used by the speaker to refer to a person. This slide contains more examples on inference. Now, David is wearing Calvin Klein. Picasso is in the museum. Mahfouz is on the top shelf. Mr. Know-it-all is late again today. Mrs. Perfect wants the assignment on time. Have you brought the blue thing? I met Shorty tonight. Now back to example number 1. David is wearing Calvin Klein. The listener will infer that David is wearing some kind of clothes made by Calvin Klein. And in Picasso is in the museum, the listener will infer that some work of Picasso is in the museum. And when the speaker say Mahfouz is on the top shelf, the listener will understand that the speaker is talking about one of Mahfouz's book. Now, in sentence number 4, Mr. Know-it-all is late again. The listener will understand that the phrase know-it-all refers to a person that he assumes that he knows everything all the time. That's why they call him know-it-all. Mrs. Perfect wants to the assignment on time. Perfect here refers to a person. Have you brought the blue thing? The blue thing here refers to something that is known to both the speaker and the listener, and for some reason they want to hide the actual thing. I met Shorty tonight. Shorty is an adjective that describes a person, so we use it to refer to some person known to both speaker and listener. Presuppositions are widely used by lawyers, judges, and police for interrogation purposes. For example, a lawyer might ask a killer or a criminal, how many shots you fired at the man? Because the lawyer wants the man to admit, he wants to trick the man into admitting that he fired the shots at the man and killed him. The presupposition here, the killer fired some shots. Example number 5, where did you buy these adult eggs? The presupposition, the eggs are adult. Example 6, why did you arrive late? The presupposition here that the person being asked has arrived late. Okay, this is the end of this lecture, and thank you very much for listening.